Lulu, thank you so much for bringing the premiere of your series in this particular episode to Toronto. This is a city where every other person was born outside of Canada, so we are a city of both migrants and expats, and I wanted to start there because there's an important distinction, I think, between what we call migrants and who we call expats. And I wonder, when you were approaching Janice Y.K. Lee's book, what was your understanding of that distinction?
I think that both in the novel and in my conversations with Janice, there were a lot of questions around that, because the story is so focused on the characters, it doesn't go into specifically those distinctions, but it was a question that we all asked, and, we Googled and talked about it, and, it's just kind of our definition. We said, well, privilege is one of them, that, the word expats always brings up this idea of privilege and wealth, and permanence is another one. But I'm sure there's so many others, and it was just worth interrogating, all of these different terms and who gets called what and why.
And for this particular episode, the only one that's feature length, the one that we just watched, you chose to focus, I guess, more on the women who are considered migrants, who are migrant workers in Hong Kong. And I know that's an important part of the story that you wanted to tell. Can you talk a little bit about telling the whole story over 6 episodes, but choosing this particular part of it for this piece?
Yeah, I think that, again, a lot of these characters were in the novel, and in adapting, we talked about, Janice and I, as well as the other writers, had talked about expanding the world, the characters, and because it is a series about women, which, people often say that's feminist, we're telling these stories about women, and I felt that I couldn't tell a story about women without including these other women and these other issues around race and class and, the intersection of all of those identities.
And Hong Kong is such a particular cauldron for all of these stories. Well, I wonder if you tell us a little bit about shooting there, because you spent a fair bit of time in Hong Kong, and what your experience of the place was before you went, and then while you were shooting, and as you were trying to capture a place that was still in a lot of transition. This is set in 2014, I believe, and Hong Kong has changed since then a lot politically. So you captured a moment, and we see the umbrellas and certain elements that are of that time. But in terms of capturing Hong Kong, especially in this episode where there's a typhoon coming, which is so much a part of Hong Kong as well, what was most important to you to capture, to evoke what Hong Kong was then?
I think just that I wanted this energy that it was a city that was on the precipice of change, if not having already changed significantly. When I was visiting there, again, I felt very much, part of the privileged class of going back as an expat and staying at, hotels and all of these things. But I was also conflicted and incredibly moved because, I was there, for example, during prep on June 4th. And since I left the mainland in 1989 and have been in the States, I'd never had a moment where I saw people commemorating at Tiananmen Square, and in Hong Kong they do, and it was a massive movement, and it was incredibly moving to see people in their 70s on their knees in the street commemorating this thing that I was so connected to, and so. I think just myself being at, having both of these identities and trying to grapple with both sides of my own identity, it was important for me to just capture all of these different perspectives.
And as you were building the story as a series, and this will be available, I think, sometime next year on Prime Video, but for now we get a chance to see it before anyone else does, which is great. As you're building this series from the book, are you thinking, as you're initially doing the screenplay, about who will play the roles, or did the casting process come after? I'm curious to know how you put the cast together and when you first saw in your mind who should play these main characters.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know if I need to say, but Nicole,
That would be
was the
Nicole
starting.
Kidman,
Nicole
yes, thank
Kidman
you.
was the starting point. And even when we first spoke, she was like, "Should I play Hillary and should I play Margaret?" We weren't sure because Hillary was not written as being South Asian in the novel. And I said, "No, you have to be Margaret. You know, you are this mother who's lost his child, but obviously she is not a quarter Asian, and I, didn't want to portray her as such. So, logically, we started casting, just making decisions around that. Well, their kid has to look Asian, and we were looking specifically for Clark to be an Asian actor. And it was in the writers' room that we decided to have a dark-skinned woman play Hillary and deal with issues of colorism in East Asia, or at least just see her on screen in that kind of environment. And when we saw Sarayu Blue, who's incredibly talented, but she had done a lot of comedy. Network comedies, we just felt she would be such a great balance to the tonal drama and the darkness that Nicole brings, as well as Ji-young Yoo. This whole cast, so much of the ensemble was cast in Hong Kong. Ruby Ruiz, who plays Essie, was cast in the Philippines. So it was quite an international process.
You've cast comic actors in dramatic work before. In The Farewell, you have Awkwafina Nora Young playing a very, it's a heartbreaking role, and a woman who is divided and kind of caught between worlds. But not her usual comic chops are required for that. So is there something about comic actors that you feel has a sort of untapped potential for drama?
Always. I mean, I've always said that you can teach anybody drama, but you can't teach comedy. That's just timing. It's just wit. It's how you're raised. It comes so naturally. And so with Sarayu, it was it's just such an easy decision for me because I knew that with, just a glance of her eye and I needed levity. I mean, this series is quite dark. It's got a lot, and thank you everyone for laughing every single moment that you laugh because, the number of times throughout the process where we were like, is this funny? So I'm really glad when people laugh. I think that you need that release, in order to feel all the heavier things.
And because this is also a city with a lot of Filipina migrants, and in many cases people who come as migrant workers, as many cities around the world are now. And that's a particular element that I think you show really beautifully in Hong Kong. First of all, those Sundays where there's just mass gatherings of the women who get that one day off, and they gather together, and that is their moment with their friends and family. And but then also how they navigate the homes of the wealthy and privileged where they work. And it's very specific to this group of Filipina women in particular. And I wonder what it took to be able to capture that accurately.
Yeah, there's a lot of women. When I first went to Hong Kong and I saw this, I was like, what is going on? There's hundreds and thousands of women on the street, and it's impossible to really capture the scale of that. And they come from all over Southeast Asia. There's Malaysian, Indonesian, and we, because the majority is Filipina, that's what we chose to cast. But and then I learned that this happens all over Asia, not just Hong Kong. And so, yeah, like it took a lot. I mean, we cast a lot of non-actors, and I worked a lot with them and an interpreter to improvise, to find those scenes because I don't speak the language. And I really leaned on them to help me capture what the energy of this was. And they told me so many things that I was like, okay, I can't really put that in the show, but I wish that I could do like 10 spin-offs.
Was this originally conceived as a series, or could this have been a feature film, the whole book?
I didn't think about it as a feature. It was conceived as a series, and so that's how I came into it. And what I love about television and novels is that they go together perfectly. The way that you can jump timelines, the way that you can change perspectives, and I think television audiences are getting smarter and smarter about, like things that come out of left field and just rolling with it, and bottle episodes and whatnot. And so it just felt really natural to adapt this for television.
And I remember when we were first talking about bringing expats to the festival, there were many different possibilities, right? We imagined for a moment showing the whole series and or just this one thing, and then we saw this episode, and it does feel like a film that is self-contained in a way, although it's obviously connected to the characters and the other storylines. Can you talk, I guess, a little bit about how those two formats differ for you as a storyteller? The feature film format with its own sort of beginning, middle, and end, and then the series format with as you say, the kind of the ongoing intersecting stories.
It's a good question. This is a limited series because to me, it's hard for me to conceive a story without a beginning, middle, and end. And so even though it's a series, it felt like a really long movie. And we really shot it like a film because we shot it, out of order and just was block shooting. But I guess the difference is just one, the length, the scope, being able to jump around. There is a lot more flexibility. And really, I was trying to think about how to make every chapter totally different and surprising, have its own visual language, but then also connect to the whole. And so a film is just a whole, and to me, and this series, I was constantly jumping between the micro and the macro, and how does this work in this moment, but then how does it connect to the bigger picture? And this episode was particularly challenging because I knew that I wanted audiences to be able to watch it without the context of the other episodes, but I also didn't want it to feel repetitive for people who were watching it in order from start to finish. And so it was really tricky to figure out how much information to give, when to give it, how to not make it feel expositional, and have it, work in both ways.
There are some lovely cinematic techniques, for lack of a better word, that you use in terms of how you use time, sort of cutting back and forth between stories and timelines, but then also how you use music. I've seen this before, and then I was just watching the end of it backstage and tearing up. And it was the combination of just the images and how you hold them, how you use time on screen, and the use of music in that final sequence. And I don't know what you did, but it got me. And I guess I want to ask a little bit about using those kinds of formal techniques to generate emotion in this story.
We had, first of all, just an incredible composer, Alex Weston, and as well as these great songs that we adapted, and we brought this young woman, Kennedy Ryan, to sing these songs that are older songs, but we adapted them for her voice because I really wanted a woman's voice. And for this episode in particular, it was important that there was pop music because it's a heavy episode, and I wanted to balance that, but also because the reality is that, the domestic workers on their day off are listening to such fun music, and there is such a love for American pop music. So I think, I was just trying to really capture the scope of both the drama and the comedy and the liveliness. And like I said earlier, I think the more that people feel like they can laugh and there's that lightness, the more when you get to the heavier moments, then it kind of hits you in a surprising way.
So we got to see it here in Toronto, in a very kind of migrant-centered city, and you watched it with the audience to kind of get the feel of how you were all reacting. But when this does go out on Prime Video, it's going all over the world, thanks to these platforms, but also to places that are both givers and receivers of expats, shall we say. How do you imagine it's going to be received in different parts of the world, depending on what people bring to it?
I'm not sure. I'm sure there's a lot of people who will relate to all these many characters and many people who might be angry. I mean, it seems like everybody's angry all the time about something. So I just assume people will be angry, and I have to just like be used to that. But I'm okay with that. I think what this series is about overall is grace. We're living in this moment in time where everything is binary. You are on the right or the left. You are either a hero to be worshipped or you're canceled. Everything is so polarizing, and I intentionally wanted to tackle this world and have it be polarizing. You have a perpetrator and a victim, and sometimes that turns itself. The perpetrator becomes the victim becomes the perpetrator in a different storyline. And I want people to talk about it. You'll find yourself hating a character and then loving them, and then loving a character and suddenly realizing, wait a second, I was wrong, I should not like them. And
Hillary.
We'll talk about that after. But I think I love Hillary. She has the best outfits.
She does, it's true.
In the series. But yeah, so I think that's just what makes people. That is human. And so I'm hoping that people come out of this with a more expanded viewpoint and a willingness to be more open-minded and more accepting.
Thank you. That's all the time we have, unfortunately, but I
Thank you.
just want to ask you to please join me in thanking Lulu Wang.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here for Expats Central episode.